My best friend of 12 years stole my career. Then he slept with my wife. And the only thing I ever said to him about any of it was, "Congratulations, Marcus. You earned it." His name was Marcus Webb. We met on our first day at Global Kick, a sports marketing agency in Chicago that specialized in brand activation for major international events. Same start date. Adjacent desks in an open-plan office that smelled like carpet glue and someone's ambitious lunch. We were both 24. By the end of month one, we were getting lunch together every day. By the end of year one, we were covering for each other in meetings where neither of us had do any of the prep. That's the specific texture of what 12 years builds. You stop explaining yourself. A look across a conference table communicates more than a paragraph ever could. You know which excuses the other person will believe and which ones they won't. You know when to push and when to leave it. Before I tell you what Marcus did, I need to be precise about who he was. Because this story only works if you understand that. Marcus was charming in the way that actually matters in rooms where deals get made. Not charming like a salesperson. Charming like someone who genuinely found you interesting. He remembered names, remembered details, made the second meeting feel like a reunion. Clients trusted him before he had finished his first sentence. What Marcus had never been able to do, in 12 years, not once, was build the intellectual architecture underneath that charm. He needed someone to hand him the framework, the thinking, the model. Then he was extraordinary. Without it, he was all surface. Appealing to look at, going nowhere. I was the framework person. We had this arrangement for years without ever naming it. I built the foundation. He sold it. Nobody was jealous of what the other had. We each understood exactly what we brought to the table. That understanding, that complete, unquestioned trust, was the exact instrument he would use against me. In the spring of 2025, Global Kick put itself in the running for the official fan experience activation partnership for the FIFA World Cup 2026. The tournament was hosted across the United States, Canada, and Mexico, the first North American World Cup since 1994. Stadiums from Los Angeles to Toronto to Mexico City. The cultural weight of it was hard to overstate. The activation deal we were targeting was worth $40 million. And whoever landed it wasn't just bringing in a commission. They were becoming the person who put a mid-sized sports marketing agency on the map of the most watched event in human history. In this industry, that kind of deal defines careers. I spent 18 months building our proposal. Not an exaggeration. 18 months of research, analysis, evenings, early mornings before anyone else was in the building. I called the finished product the Pulse Framework, a 140-page pitch architecture that mapped the full fan experience across all 12 host cities. This wasn't a deck with logos and aspirational photography. It was a system. The framework analyzed how fan behavior changed depending on location. Mexican supporters traveling to Dallas consumed the stadium experience differently than Canadian fans arriving in New York. Different arrival patterns, different pre-match behavior, different dwell time and activation zones, different brand affinities by demographic. The Pulse framework had a data layer, a digital integration model, a physical fan zone architecture, and a brand fit matrix that matched specific sponsors to specific city profiles based on real fan data. It was, without any performance of modesty, the most complete work I had ever produced in my career. And I knew it. Marcus knew it too. I'd walked him through early versions 3 separate times, getting his read on which sections would land in the room, which needed more setup for a C-suite audience. He was useful, like he always was. His reactions told me where I was losing a non-technical stakeholder. He helped me sharpen what I'd built. I trusted him so completely that the possibility of what came next never crossed my mind. Not once. 3 weeks before the board presentation, Marcus requested a private meeting with David Park, our CEO, and the head of FIFA partnerships. No calendar invite to me. No heads-up email. No mention over lunch. I found out it had happened from an administrative assistant who referenced it in passing, assuming I already knew. He had walked into that room with my Pulse framework. He spent 3 weeks of his own time changing the fonts, reorganizing the slide order, swapping a handful of brand names. He presented it as his own work. He landed the deal. I found out from Priya Sharma. Priya was my junior analyst, 24 years old, 18 months into the job, the kind of person who was sharp in the way that makes other people quietly uncomfortable because she noticed everything and said a measured amount about what she noticed. In an office, that combination is rarer than it sounds. She had been in an adjacent meeting room during a debrief after Marcus's presentation. One of those glass-walled rooms where sound carries farther than people account for. And she heard Marcus walk through my Pulse framework point by point, section by section, as if the words had been native to him. She came to my office that afternoon, closed the door, sat down across from me, put both hands flat on the desk in front of her, a gesture I noticed because it was unusual, like someone stabilizing themselves before they said something they couldn't unsay. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to let me finish before you say anything." I let her finish. By the time she was done, Marcus had already been offered the chief revenue officer role, 2 full levels above where either of us sat. The announcement was going out that Friday. I sat for a moment. The hum of the air conditioning. Priya watching me with an expression I couldn't quite land, somewhere between controlled anger on my behalf and genuine concern about what I was about to do. I said, "Thank you for telling me. But here's what I need you to hold on to right now, before we go any further. What Priya told me that afternoon is not what changes this story. The part that changes everything comes later. And I'm going to plan a detail in what comes next, and I want you to notice it, because you will understand why it matters before this is over." That evening, I drove home with the windows down. Chicago in June. The river smell, heat sitting in the pavement, the city still going. I parked outside my house for a few minutes before I went in. Diana, my wife of 7 years, was in the kitchen when I came through the door. She asked how my day was. I said fine. She made pasta. We ate at the table and talked about a show we were watching. She made some comment about wanting to go somewhere for the 4th of July weekend. I noticed, while we were eating, that her phone was face down on the counter. She hadn't always done that. I registered it and said nothing. The next morning, I walked past Marcus's office and knocked on the glass. He looked up. I watched his face move through something, a fast internal calculation, a bracing for whatever I was about to say. I smiled. I walked in. I held out my hand. "I heard the news," I said. "Congratulations, Marcus. You earned it." He shook my hand. The grip lasted a fraction too long. The grip of a man who'd been expecting to be hit and wasn't. I felt the exact moment something in him settled. The moment the calculation left his eyes and his shoulders came down. That settling was the most important thing he told me without using a single word. 8 days later, I came home from the office at 3 in the afternoon. Canceled meeting, low-grade headache, no particular plan. Marcus's car was in my driveway, parked next to Diana's. I stood at the end of the path for a long time. Long enough that there was nothing to do with what I was looking at except accept it for exactly what it was. Then I got back in my car and drove to a coffee shop on Wacker Drive and opened my laptop. I sat there for 3 hours. Here's what Priya eventually pieced together before I had to explain a word of it to her. She came to my office about a week after the promotion announcement. Coffee in hand. She sat down, and she looked at my laptop screen. I organize everything in labeled folders. Always have. It's compulsive. And she went still for a moment in a way that said she was putting something together. Then she looked up and said very quietly, "You already knew, didn't you?" Not a question. I had known about Marcus and Diana for 6 weeks before the board presentation. A text Diana had left visible on our shared household iPad, the one we used for grocery lists and dinner reservations. One message. Same time tonight. Marcus's contact photo in the corner. I had seen it. I had put the iPad down. I had said nothing to either of them. Not because I was paralyzed. Not because I was trying to pretend it wasn't real. Because I was already thinking. I called a lawyer. A divorce attorney who also worked with intellectual property cases. I drove to her office on a Saturday morning and sat across from her for 2 hours and told her everything. Not the emotional version, the documentary version. Dates. Evidence. What I could prove and what I couldn't yet. Because here is what 12 years alongside Marcus had made completely clear to me. He was reactive, not strategic. He was extraordinary at executing someone else's plan in favorable conditions. Under pressure, without a framework handed to him, he panicked. And the moment he believed he had won, truly believed the threat was gone, he would stop tracking what was happening around him. I needed him to believe he had won, completely and without any doubt. So I spent those 6 weeks doing 4 things simultaneously. First, I filed an intellectual property declaration on the Pulse framework with a third-party documentation service. Every draft, every version, every revision note and source dataset. Timestamped, witnessed, legally verifiable. 18 months of documented evidence that the framework existed and was mine before Marcus had seen the first slide. Second, I opened a quiet conversation with Global Kick's primary competitor, Sportech Media, and offered them a second generation of the same thinking. Not a copy, an evolution. 6 more months of data, a more sophisticated city-by-city segmentation model, a digital integration layer that the original Pulse framework didn't yet have. Better in every dimension that mattered. I scheduled the Sportech pitch for the same week as Global Kick's FIFA board presentation. Third, I documented everything I could verify regarding the affair. Dates, timelines, anything with a paper trail. This mattered to my attorney for the divorce filing. Fault divorce in Illinois carries real weight in asset division proceedings, and my assets at that point were considerable. Fourth, and this is the part one find hardest to explain calmly, Because it required something of me I had not known I possessed. I stayed. I came home every evening. I cooked dinner. I asked about her day. I sat across from Diana at the table and let nothing cross my face that should not have been there. Because the moment Diana knew I knew, Marcus would know within the hour. And Marcus needed to stay comfortable for exactly a little while longer. You cannot rush what comes next. That is the thing nobody tells you. The waiting is the actual work. Underscore 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 underscore. Remember what I said at the very start of this story, that when my best friend handed me the worst period of my life, I looked him in the eye and thanked him? I wasn't being ironic. I wasn't performing a grace I didn't feel. Because if Marcus hadn't walked into that room with my framework when he did, I don't build Series 2. I don't call Sportech. I don't have the clarity that only comes from knowing, with complete certainty, exactly who the people around you are. He thought he was taking my future. He was clearing the path to it. Underscore 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 underscore. The Global Kick board presentation happened on a Tuesday in March 2026. FIFA officials in the room. $40 million on the table. Marcus walked in wearing a suit I'd never seen before. He must have bought it specifically for that day. He stood at the front of that room, and he was extraordinary. That is the complicated part. He delivered the Pulse framework with the kind of confidence that only comes when you've absorbed something so completely it starts to feel like yours. The room leaned in. David Park nodded through each section. The FIFA representatives made the sounds that people make when they are already sold and are just going through the process of deciding. The next morning, Sportech Media presented Pulse Framework, Series 2 to FIFA's Activation Committee. A completely separate team, a better product, more favorable commercial terms, a richer analytical foundation. 2 days later, Sportech signed the FIFA deal. David Park called Marcus in on Thursday and asked him to walk through the research history of the Global Kick pitch. The source files, the original data, the version trail. Marcus had 3 weeks of font changes, slide reordering, and brand name substitutions. I had 18 months of timestamp documentation and an IP declaration filed 8 weeks before his presentation. I was not in that meeting. I didn't need to be. Priya attended as the analyst of record on the account. She called me afterward, and the stillness in her voice told me everything before she said a word. He didn't speak for almost 4 minutes after the first question, she said. Just sat there. The whole hallway could see through the glass. He'd been offered a CRO role on a Friday. By the following Thursday, he had resigned. No announcement. An internal email about other opportunities. By the time it landed in inboxes, I had already signed the Sportech consulting agreement. 3 weeks later, I filed for divorce. Diana didn't contest it. I think she was relieved to stop maintaining the version of things that wasn't true. Marcus never called. Not once. Not a text. Not an email. Nothing. Underscore 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 underscore. One more thing. Because everything I've described is the architecture of what happened. What I didn't plan for, what I couldn't have designed, was what it felt like the moment it was actually over. Sportech brought me to Kansas City in July for the World Cup semifinal between England and Brazil. The Pulse framework activations were running at full scale. The fan zones, the digital touchpoints, the brand integrations across every concourse. Everything I had built in a coffee shop and a home office over 18 months, alive now at the exact size it was always supposed to be. 78,000 people in that stadium. The noise when Brazil equalized in the second half was the loudest sound I have ever been inside. Not music. Not a crowd in the abstract. Just human sound. All of it aimed at exactly the same moment, for exactly the same reason. Nobody in that stadium was thinking about anything except the ball. I sat in my seat and stopped running the numbers. Stopped thinking about the commission. Stopped thinking about anything that had happened. And then, somewhere in the second half, I thought about Marcus. Not with anger. Not with the kind of satisfaction I might have expected, after everything. Just thinking about him. 12 years. His wedding. Mine. The parked car after pitches where we'd eat sandwiches because neither of us wanted to go back inside yet. The early office. The carpet smell. The specific feeling of building something together and both knowing it before you said a word. I don't know what became of him after Global Kick. I haven't looked. There's nothing in it for me to find. What I know is this. He took my framework and believed he was taking my future. But the framework was never my future. It was just what I built while I was still finding my way to it. Marcus took my work. He took my marriage. He took 6 months of dinners and weekends and conversations where I sat across from two people who were lying to me, and I said nothing. But he miscalculated one thing. I had taught him everything he knew, which meant I understood exactly what he was going to do with it before he did it. You cannot steal an idea from the person who is still 10 steps ahead of you. Underscore, underscore. If this story moved you at all, a like genuinely helps more people find it. Share it with someone who's in the middle of something quiet right now, something they're not ready to say out loud yet. And if you're not subscribed, there are more stories like this one coming. One question before you go. Has someone ever taken credit for something you built, and you had to sit there and say nothing while it happened? Tell me what that felt like. I'd genuinely love to know.